Welcome to another edition of the Hawk Off the Press podcast. I'm your host, Gazette Hawkeyes reporter, John Steppe. I am excited to welcome back to the podcast Mike Carmin from the Lafayette Journal and Courier. He covers Purdue football and got an interesting matchup. So, Mike, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thank you for reaching out. Good to see you again.
Yes, good to see you too. So first of all, I want to ask about this wide receiver that Purdue has this year. I heard that he's having almost like an All-American season. Let's see. His name is Charlie Jones. I'm not sure if anybody from Iowa has heard of this guy.
Well,
sounds like he's having quite the season.
But I understand the snark in your voice, in your comment, but I'm not sure Iowa people actually knew about him, did they? Because he wasn't anywhere on the depth chart. Now, I know he returned a lot of punts for Iowa and was Big Ten Returner of the Year, so maybe they were aware of him. But the question I've had this year, it's like, with the struggles Iowa has had on offense, would Charlie Jones been an option for them at receiver this year to try to elevate their offense?
Well, I think the challenge would they be able to get him the ball?
Well,
they had some of these passes until Northwestern. Of course, Northwestern was its own game, and we'll see how much of that translates into the future. But if they didn't have a quarterback who could get the ball to Charlie Jones, you don't know how effective he would have been. But they certainly could have used to have at least that matchup option when they at one point had one scholarship wide receiver available.
Right. No, Charlie's been a godsend for the program because they needed a number one receiver based on graduation and the fact that Milton Wright, who probably was Purdue's next NFL caliber receiver behind David Bell, was academically ineligible for the bowl game and then academically ineligible for this year. So they needed someone. And Jeff Brohm has been honest that he didn't know a whole lot about Charlie Jones when this whole thing started. And he really leaned on Aiden O'Connell, the quarterback, to basically sell him on his skill set and what he could bring to the team. Now, Aiden and Charlie have a previous relationship from youth football way back in the day where they played baseball and football together. So Aiden knew Charlie Jones from the Buffalo Grove Bills. I think that was their youth team. And he had kept in touch with him, but didn't know everything. So Jeff kind of took a flyer on him, and then once they got him here and looked at him and figured he could really help them. And then his production really early in the year has been excellent. He's been nicked up and banged up, and the off week, he didn't practice last week, and I assume he'll still be limited this week. They're just trying to get him to game day each week now, but his production has been off the charts. He's obviously the number one guy, and he's filled a big void for them, and he's one reason why they are in a position to clinch a bowl game here in the month of November, but also still have a chance to win the Big Ten West.
And it sounds like the Chuck Sizzle nickname has caught on.
Yeah. I mean, anytime a guy's catching 10 balls a game, there's an attraction there. But yeah, people have caught on to him, and they like what he's brought. He's scored some, made some big plays and scored some big touchdowns for him. They need that to continue, and they've got these next 2 weeks. They're probably facing, well, when you factor in Wisconsin too, their 3-game stretch here facing some really good defenses. They're going to have to figure out a way to move the ball down the field through the air and get some big plays over the top.
And then speaking of the Iowa to Purdue transfer pipeline, got Tyrone Tracy too, who last year, I'm paraphrasing here because I don't have it right next to me, but he had a tweet that I later deleted about why having a Swiss Army knife when you don't use it has Tyrone Tracy, has the Swiss Army knife been used at Ross-Ade Stadium?
I thought, based on the spring, because he got here in January, that we would see more of him, but we haven't. He's not, the first game against Penn State, he wasn't that heavily involved. And then we brought it up the next week during Jeff Brohm's, weekly press conference. And then against Indiana State, he was really involved early. But I thought he would be more of a factor in this offense. And when you go back to the spring, and spring is spring, and that's what it is. But the way they used him in the spring, in the backfield, and also at receiver, I thought they had a chance to really have a dynamic weapon there. But that it hasn't panned out like that. Part of that is because they did get Charlie Jones as well. But you wonder if there's something behind the scenes that's happening where he's not been as involved. Is he picking up on the offense as well as he should? Is he, does he have too much on his plate trying to be a running back and trying to be a receiver? But anyway, I've been a little disappointed based on the production, but also his involvement, which is not, I don't know if it falls on him all the way, but I think he's a guy that they can use more and should use more. But, here we are in November, and pretty much your identity is who you are. So we'll see if any of that changes here over the next 4 games.
And then while we're talking about the receiving core, seems like Purdue is quite the tight end with Payne Durham. Yeah,
he's a great option in the middle. He was open over the middle against Wisconsin a lot. I do think that Aiden O'Connell does get fixated on Charlie Jones, which is easy to do. And he got fixated on David Bell too, and other receivers that have come through Purdue, the quarterbacks have. But I think the tight end is, Payne has really done a good job. He's had some big moments and some big games. But I do think he disappears when he shouldn't. He's been excellent in the red zone. But I think they should use him more. But Purdue's also trying to protect him from an injury because they don't have a lot of depth at tight end. They lost their number 2 tight end in practice in August. And they had some big plans to use both Garrett Miller and Payne Durham this year. But Payne will come up with big plays on third down. He's someone you have to pay attention to if you're the defense. And I think, in a way, if he can get more involved in November, that's going to increase Purdue's chances of potentially winning the West and having a good month to finish this season out.
Our producer might have to bleep out David Bell, considering there might be a few not so great memories.
Well, if you watched that game last night, it wasn't that David Bell caught passes, and he caught a couple, but they highlighted a few blocks that he made. And that, to me, that was the most overlooked thing of David Bell's game, is his ability and his desire to block on the perimeter. And I know he caught a ton of balls against Iowa and all that, but he was an excellent blocker in college and has carried that over to the pro level. And I know David Bell's a 4-letter curse word in Iowa, but along with some other receivers over the last 5 or 6 years. But David, David's a talented guy, and I think Iowa fans, as much as they don't like him, I think they appreciate his talent level.
I think there's a level of respect there. And then Aiden O'Connell, I was looking at his stats this year, and they don't seem to be quite as good as last year, but I think you would probably, if you were an Iowa fan, you would take those numbers in a heartbeat. What's been kind of the situation for him this year?
Well, one of the interesting questions coming in was how would he perform without a David Bell? Because Purdue's had this run of really good receivers, Rondell Moore and David Bell, over the last few years that, to be honest, would bail you out of bad throws, and you could just throw it to a spot knowing that David or Rondell or whoever would get the ball. But they don't have that kind of receiver right now. Charlie Jones would be the closest one, and he has a connection with Charlie. But his percentage is not what it was last year. And to be honest, it was going to be hard to duplicate what he did last year, because he got on a run of 5, 6, 7 games of 70% or better. And that's hard to do, especially when you don't have the same level of receivers that you've had. But for the most part, I mean, a couple of weeks ago against Nebraska, he was really good. He made some NFL caliber throws, and it wasn't just one, it was a handful of throws that NFL scouts will pour over in the evaluation process. But the last game against Wisconsin, he was not good. He had a pick six where he just threw it to the guy, and he had another interception that he threw it to the same guy. And he just wasn't sharp. He wasn't comfortable in the pocket, and that's more of a protection issue. But he needs to play better. He still has the arm strength. He can't run any faster than you and I. So he's not a scrambler. But he's got to move the pocket a little bit. And he just needs to be more pinpoint with his throws, especially facing this Iowa defense, and then the next week against Illinois. I think Illinois and Iowa have a combined 23 interceptions this year, and they're going to be looking to pick him off. And they've studied the film against Wisconsin, and they're going to try to do the same thing. But he needs to be sharper. He knows it, and we'll see what happens Saturday.
And then on the defensive line, Iowa fans will be happy to hear no more George Karlaftis. What should they expect from that position group?
The defensive line is a deep group. They will play up to 12. They have played up to 12 players in that group. They've been okay against the run, better than okay against the run in Big Ten play. Now Wisconsin got them a couple weeks ago, but Wisconsin gets everybody. So they need to tighten up some things there. He gave up too many. There were a couple long runs that really hurt them, but they're giving up in Big Ten games around 100 yards a game, which I think is okay. And we know that Iowa is going to be committed to running the ball as well. But it's a deep group. The tackles are good with Branson Dean and Lawrence Johnson. The edge guys, Kadron Jenkins, he got injured against Wisconsin, didn't return, but it looks like he will play on Saturday, or at least he'll be a game time decision. Jack Sullivan is a guy that's kind of taken Georgia's spot on the edge. He had a sack against Wisconsin. Their issue is they just haven't generated a lot of plays in the backfield. Now they are averaging 3 sacks a game in the last 3 games. They need more pressure on the quarterback to really help. What's the problem? The biggest problem on defense is the secondary, and they need more pressure. They need to get the ball out of the quarterback's hands sooner, not let him go through all his progressions. But it's been the strength of the defense, has been the defensive line, and it's really going to have to step up here in November to keep Purdue alive.
You were mentioning the weakness of the secondary. It seems like if there's a desired matchup outside of Northwestern that still does not have a win in this continent, as we were saying beforehand, for America. So aside from Northwestern, this seems to be a good opportunity for Spencer Petras with just the weakness of Purdue's secondary.
Well, first of all, we don't know exactly who's going to play because both their starting cornerbacks left the Wisconsin game with injuries and didn't return. And based on what Jeff Brohm said Monday, they had not practiced last week. The goal was to get them to practice on Sunday. That did not happen. Tuesday will be the next opportunity. If those two guys don't play, then you're really digging deep into the depth, and they don't have a lot of depth there. So you would see some guys move around. But even when these guys have been healthy, it's been low production. I mean, Nebraska just burned them, so much. They were chasing Trey Palmer and all those receivers around all night. Wisconsin was somewhat similar. They've had issues back there, and whether it's the scheme, whether it's they're being coached wrong or whatever. I mean, there's just they've had a lot of problems back there, and they don't face. Now, Iowa's not the greatest throwing team in the world. Now, Illinois can get you through the air based on the season DeVito's having, but when you look at Northwestern, Indiana, they don't scare you from a passing standpoint. So, Purdue is probably playing the right teams with a weak secondary, but you can't let guys get behind you. And that's been the problem. And that's not just the cornerback position, it's been the safety position as well. And one of the guys that I've really enjoyed watching during his career, Cam Allen, he played well early in the year, but now he's chasing guys left and right. So they need a serious come to Jesus meeting in the secondary, because that has been exposed. And as you know, teams are just going to keep going at them until Purdue can prove that it can stop it. And that's why I think a better pass rush would help, because you don't know if the secondary is going to get turned around and how healthy they're going to be. So they have a lot of issues back there. And right now that would be the area of their whole team that would probably hold them back from winning the Big Ten West.
And then on the offensive side position that I forgot to touch on, running back, it seems like they have a little more production this year than in past years with the emergence of Devin Maccabee.
Yeah, he was a walk-on that joined last year, didn't play, and through some injuries, he's gotten an opportunity, and he's rushed for 100 yards in 3 of the last 4 games. Jeff Brohm calls him crazy legs. He has a very unique and different running style. His vision and his ability to cut back is probably different than any other running back Purdue's had over the years. He's got good speed. I mean, he had that one run against Minnesota at the end of the game that kind of sealed it. But he had 178 yards against Nebraska, which I know they're not the standard bearer of defense nowadays. But still, I mean, they've found their number one running back, at least through this year. And, he needs to stay healthy. The offensive line has done a good job this year. It's a veteran group. And they've opened some good holes. But yeah, they're getting decent production out of the running game. They should get Dylan Downing back, who had 100 yards against Florida Atlantic earlier this year, to help with the depth there. And they've got a Kobe Lewis, who is a transfer from Central Michigan. He's part of the rotation now. King Daru, who came into the year as their number one running back, likely will not play this week because of an injury. So they've got 3 guys that are going to rotate in there. But Devin has clearly established himself as the number one guy. And he's got, as you know, he's got a tough chore to find some holes in that Iowa defense. And, if Purdue can run the ball effectively, that's certainly going to help their cause on Saturday.
Oh, yeah. And you look at the last, if I'm doing my math right, the last 4 games, Michigan and Illinois had a lot of success running the ball, relatively a lot of success. Then Iowa did better against Ohio State and Northwestern. They beat Northwestern. And Ohio State, it wasn't the rush defense that was the problem. So you see just how much of a difference that facet of the game can make. And it'd be remiss of me as a special teams nerd to not ask about special teams. So you got Chuck Sizzle doing returning. I don't think, if I was looking at it correctly, I don't think he's taken one to the house yet this year.
He's barely taken one to the backyard. Let's put it that way. It hasn't got on track for, we thought when Charlie came that one of the big assets for Purdue was, okay, he can help kind of change the direction of their special teams in the punt return game or kickoff return. Well, it hasn't happened for, a variety of reasons. The other team they practice punting, and they practice where they're going to punt to and all that kind of stuff. He's had enough opportunities. It just hasn't happened for him. So you wonder if it's the scheme they have, or some other factors. He's had a couple of nice runs, but nothing that we thought. And, maybe our expectations were a little bit too high, because he came in with great credentials and all that. You would, expect it. But, that area of special teams probably hasn't produced like we thought. But, Mitchell Finneran, their kicker, the last 2 years he's kind of hit a rut and then finishes strong. Their punter, Jack Ansell, is probably more consistent this year than he has been last year. This would be his second year punting for Purdue. They haven't got a lot out of the kickoff return. Their coverage has been okay. Right now, I don't think special teams has really cost them a game in any way, but I don't think special teams has won them a game either. So depending on how you look at it, that's what happens. They've had a punt blocked. I think Nebraska got them a few weeks ago. So they've been there, but you haven't really noticed them unless something bad happens.
And then still early in the week, but do you have a score prediction yet?
I don't. This is going to be, as you know, if you fall behind Iowa, you're running uphill the rest of the day, and you can't let Iowa get a turnover and score. You can't let their defense score. You can't let their special team score. Any points they get, Iowa has to earn on offense. And if Purdue can avoid that, I think Purdue can win the game. But you and I both know we can't sit here and predict that on Tuesday. When you look at Purdue's success against Iowa under Jeff Brohm, you would lean toward Purdue because they've kind of figured, for whatever reason, they've kind of figured them out, and Iowa, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to adjust. Now, do they blanket Charlie Jones more than what they normally would with a receiver, or do they do some different things? I anticipate probably a low scoring game on Saturday. First 1 to 10 wins. I don't know for sure. But I don't have a score yet. I would probably lean toward Purdue right now to win the game, because I do think they're more balanced across the board than Iowa. Iowa seems to be dependent on its defense to not only put its offense in a position to score, but also to score for them.
Yes,
and
exactly.
That's a lot to ask of a team. And if Purdue can get some chunk plays, that'll soften some things up. But I would lean toward Purdue right now, based on what we know here early in the week. And to me, the most fascinating stat about Iowa, and when you take away what Michigan and Ohio State did to them offensively, two best teams in the league, they're only giving up a touchdown and a half in those other 6 games. So, Purdue has its work cut out to try to get on the board and try to maintain some drives, but also finish off drives. And that's, if you're from a Purdue standpoint, that to me, that's a concern. If teams are only getting 1 touchdown on average against them, and your name's not Michigan and Ohio State, then you've got some serious work ahead of you. And that's why I say I think it'll be a low scoring game. And as you mentioned, special teams, field goal, if you get in a position, I think whatever team can get in position to score, they need to take the points when they can, because I think points will probably be at a premium on Saturday.
Yeah. And the thing too with the touchdown and a half is that's despite opposing teams having some short fields, just because the offense hasn't been able to sustain drives, and a punter can only do so much.
Right.
So the funny comments I was seeing on social media, because the punting is winning shirts are very popular in Iowa City.
Well, that can work for you, man. That can work for them. They're still, strange things can happen. As far-fetched as it sounds, Iowa can still win the Big Ten West. Sure. Because if things fall apart for Illinois and Purdue in the month of November, who's going to be waiting there to clean up the pieces? Either Iowa or Wisconsin.
Yeah.
One of those 2 teams are going to probably pick up the pieces if Illinois and Purdue find themselves on the side of the road with a flat tire in the month of November.
Oh, yeah. And you don't know what Minnesota team is going to show up either.
Well, I think they're getting healthy now. I think they're kind of back, but there's something missing there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, I don't know if I don't think it's a player. There's just something missing there with them, but they will have they could factor into how this West is eventually won if Illinois and Purdue, fall apart here in November. I think, it's pretty clear that either Illinois or Purdue, they have their path to win the West. But if one of them would lose here, or both of them lose in the next few weeks, then, it's going to open the door for maybe Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa, when we could be headed towards a 5-way tie atop the league. And don't ask me about tiebreakers.
I was going to say, my head is already hurting thinking about the 5-way tie scenarios.
Well, the other question becomes, do you really want to win the West knowing who's on the other side? So
Iowa fans probably know that as well as anybody after that 42-3 game that
right.
Our producer Nathan is probably also going to have to bleep out. So, you still get the benefit of having a Big Ten West champion banner up, but I also don't have a score prediction quite yet at this point in the week, but I'm leaning towards Purdue. They seem to have figured out Phil Parker better than anybody else. And you look at it, the Northwestern game was encouraging, but is it encouraging enough to make up for a team that probably is not Iowa's most favorable matchup? I don't quite think so, but we'll see what happens on Saturday.
Yeah, and that's the thrill of it. There's so much unknown that you watch it unfold and then see where it goes from there.
Well, Mike, thanks for joining me.
Hey, not a problem. Thanks for reaching out, and best of luck to you, but not to your Packers.
And best of luck to you, but not your Bears or your Cubs in the off season.
Okay. Well, hopefully we spend some money.
And thanks to our listeners for tuning into another episode of Hawk Off the Press. I'll be back with another edition after the Purdue game, the Hawk Off the Press after the final score. Until then, we will talk Hawks later.